and I was just looking at the view, and I took a step, tripped over a root, scun up both my knees, both my hands, and I was bleeding everywhere, and I was fine, but I looked ridiculous, and I was going down the mountain at that time, so I didn't have much of a ways to go, so I tried to rub off, in a stream, and with leaves, I had leaves stuck to me, and I'm going down the trail, and a whole troop of Boy Scouts goes by me, and I look ridiculous, and I was so embarrassed. They're like, "Do you need some first aid?" I'm like, "No, I'm fine. I'm just gonna get back to my car right now. I'm fine."
This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine. There's a reason Aislinn Sarnacki is a very popular writer for the outdoor pages of the Bangor Daily News. Her columns and blogs are widely read, and her 1-minute hike videos get a lot of views. Aislinn is out walking trails every week and then reporting back to all of us. Nice job if you can get it. But then so is doing a radio show all about Wild Maine. I can't complain. Anyway, Aislinn's got a new book coming out all about family-friendly hikes, and we'll get to that. We're also going to join Dr. Chris Peterson, a marine biologist at the College of the Atlantic at Bar Harbor. By the time we've spent just 15 minutes with him, we'll never look at the tide pools, the rock-bound coast of Maine the same way again. Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine is brought to you by Hammond Lumber, Napa Auto Parts, Doors Equipment, and EBS. Now then, the Eastern Maine Sportsman Show was 2 weeks ago. There is one booth I always stop at, and we'll start today's show right there.
I'm Mark Buzzell from Nor'easter Game Calls. I turn my own custom calls one at a time. Each one of them's hand-tuned. Everything is done from the barrel to the tone board. And we sit up here at the Sportsman Show to show everybody what we got for calls. And we do duck, goose, coyote, crow, predator. Anything, if you can hunt it, we pretty much make a call for it.
All right, let's start with duck.
Got it.
Okay, now we go to goose next. Now, does that really work?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
All right, what else you got?
Oh, let's do rabbit in distress. Followed by a little coyote.
Now, I imagine a coyote cannot resist that rabbit in distress.
No, that's the dinner bell.
Yeah. All right, what else?
Now, see, we've got some crow down here.
Okay.
And this will be crow. And that's the crow.
Good.
Then give him a deer. Doe and estrus.
Okay, red squirrel. Now, does a red squirrel react to that too?
They will, yeah.
Yeah. But they'll react to anything.
Yep. And then, of course, we also, this is what we call a canine. It's a magnum howler. So you can... And that's for when it's windy out and you're hunting the fields, you need a little more noise. And, of course, we have turkey calls that are made, from slate and aluminum. Some are made out of, cactus that have been turned. Yep. The same thing, I make each one at a time.
Once again, that's Mark Buzzell, Nor'easter Game Calls. And he's local. He's over in Carmel. One of the presentations at the Eastern Maine Sportsman Show 2 weeks ago took place in Classroom B. Aislinn Sarnacki is a writer and blogger for the Bangor Daily News. Although she writes about a lot of outdoor topics and adventures, she's famous for her 1-minute hikes. Every week, Aislinn hits a trail somewhere and then writes about it. She also takes a video of her adventures, and those are popular online features for the Bangor Daily News. Well, she's now been doing it for a bunch of years, and it's time to put the best ones in a book. Her introduction to that book featured slides and movies and maps and explanations, but we'll just give them the highlights.
Okay, so this is my first talk on family-friendly hikes in Maine. It's kind of unusual because my book is actually coming out in June 1st. It was going to be May 1st, and now they're saying June 1st, so it's going to be sometime in between there. It's my first book, so I didn't realize that release dates are they fluctuate and stuff, so it may come out sometime in May. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Aislinn Sarnacki, and I write for the Bangor Daily News Outdoors section. And I have a hiking column, and I've been doing that for the past 5.5 years now. I can't believe it's been that long. And I do a different hike every week. I've only revisited a trail a few times to when I think I haven't really covered it to my fullest, and I'll go revisit it. But for the most part, they're always a different trail, and that means more than 250 different hikes throughout Maine so far. And I used to say I'm not scratching the surface. I am scratching the surface at this point, but there are so many more trails on my list to explore, especially in the far reaches of Maine because it's such a big state. Up north, way in the west, near the Bethel Rangeley area, there's still a ton of hikes I haven't done. And I'm based out of Bangor, so I'll show you a map later that shows where I've hiked, and you'll see that I have more hikes going on within an hour and a half of Bangor, and then it just kind of like sprinkles out. So this is my first book. I'm very excited about it. It's going to be released through Down East Books, and they worked in cooperation with the Bangor Daily News to make it possible, which I thought was really, really cool. We had a meeting about a year ago to talk about how that would work, because a lot of the stuff in the book comes directly from my hiking column for the Bangor Daily News, and a lot of the photos come from there, although I did go on a lot of special trips for this book, in particular because it's themed, family-friendly, being easy to moderate, easy trails that I picked out 35 of them throughout the state, and they wanted me to cover the entire state of Maine. Obviously, I can't get every great family-friendly hike in this book, but I did pick 35, and I looked at a map, and I made sure to scatter it throughout the state. So I took some special trips for this book in particular. I went over to Rangeley for a weekend with my husband and dog, and we did quite a few trails trying to find the one that we liked the best in the area. I also went up to Presque Isle with my husband and his mom and her boyfriend and our dog, and we had a great time exploring trails and trying not to get lost up there. So I did do some special trips for this book in particular, and I'm really proud of the list that I came up with. So for those of you who don't know, I have a blog. So I have a column in the Bangor Daily News that runs every Friday now, and that column goes in blog format as well, which is a lot of people still just read the print newspaper, which is really cool. But my blog, I always point people towards it's free to look at it, and I always have a video that accompanies each hike on the blog that's about 2 or 3 or 4 minutes long, depending on how long the hike is and how many interesting things I see. I find this to be a really good resource, even for me looking for a good hike, since I have 5.5 years of material on this blog. Sometimes I'll look up a hike for myself on my own blog, and I call them 1-minute hikes because the videos were essentially supposed to be 1 minute long, but I stretched that a lot.
You're listening to Aislinn Sarnacki, outdoor writer for the Bangor Daily News, talking about her new book coming out about family-friendly hikes. Coming up, what is a family-friendly hike, and why should that matter to you? Also in the way this hour, we'll hear some stuff about the rocky coast of Maine that you know nothing about. When we're done with that part of today's show, you'll be rushing over to a tidal pool and take a look for yourself. This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine on Sports Radio 92.9, The Ticket. It's Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine on Sports Radio 92.9, The Ticket. For the first half of today's episode, we're at the Eastern Maine Sportsman Show. We're sitting in Classroom B, where Bangor Daily News outdoor writer Aislinn Sarnacki is debuting her first book. all about family-friendly hikes in Maine. It'll be in bookstores in a month or two, maybe about the time the snow is gone and the black flies are bad. Next question. Why does Aislinn call her videos 1-minute hikes when they're way longer than 1 minute?
Oh, everybody wonders why. And you know what? I've wanted to change it because they're not 1 minute long. When I originally started, I launched the idea, or I pitched the idea to my editor back 5.5 years ago, and they wanted me to create really short videos for the outdoors section, and I did not know at the time how to do videos. They assumed because I was fresh out of college that I knew how to do video. And I was like, sure, I'll do videos. So I figured it out. But they wanted me to do something every single week, and that stressed me out because I didn't know I would have to come up with a different topic every week. So I decided to make it themed, and I went on a hike in the Clifton area. I went to Eagle Bluff and made a terrible video, but they thought it was a cool idea, and I was like, you know what, they can just be 1 minute long. And then I got really into it, and the videos got longer, and people did not complain, so, but then nobody knew what the whole 1 minute thing was about, and especially because it runs in print, 1 minute hike, and there's no video with the print, so everybody has no idea what that means. It's almost like it confuses people so they remember it. I don't know if that's a good tactic, but now the editors are like, no, people know what it is, like if you change it, then... So it's tough. It's the struggle is real. So the book has 35 hikes. It was tough to pick them. I had a long list, and I go to trails from so many different land trusts, state parks, national lands. I wanted to represent everybody because they all do such great work, but obviously I couldn't with 35. I did make a point to pick some state parks because they do such a great job for families. And I did pick some national properties, national lands, and then some of my very favorite land trusts, I picked like one trail from them. And the cool thing about this book is you get 35 hikes, but I talk also about the people who maintain the trails and the many other trails. Hopefully it opens the doors for you to say, oh, the Blue Hill Heritage Trust, they have this website, and I'm going to go check this out. I really like the trail from the book. And they have like 20 other trails for you to check out that are great family-friendly hikes. So I hope it opens the door for people to discover their own trails. Family-friendly is kind of a weird word. Essentially, what I wanted to do is make it so that people of all skill levels would enjoy the trails. So maybe they are easy trails, but there's so many interesting features, or there are some more challenging trails nearby connected to that network. So a lot of these trails, one of the things that I really looked at is just beautiful natural surroundings and different types of habitats. Interpretive displays are located on a lot of these trails so that you can go out there knowing nothing about flora and fauna with kids, or just a lot of these interpretive displays teach me a lot and have a lot of great text on them. And so you don't have to be an expert to go out and teach something to someone younger than you. And I made sure these trails are very, very well maintained, very well marked, and then some of them have things like playgrounds and picnic areas and things like that as well.
I'm getting a sense of deja vu because I also wrote a trail book, which was also published by Down East Books. And it's a guide to finding birds in Maine. When I helped the state design a Maine birding trail, it wasn't just about the birds. It was about adequate parking and safe walking and bathrooms and especially accurate directions. Aislinn's new book about family-friendly hikes contains information you might not even think about. For instance, what rules apply to dogs?
Because you cannot imagine how many different, very specific rules about dogs that each park and trail has. And I get called out on it because I do videos on it. So Acadia has called me up and said, that doesn't look like a 6-foot leash to me. So it's very important. I put the cost, and I even put access, because I like to do things year-round. And so wintertime sometimes can be tough because I don't know if a trailhead is, the parking is plowed, or if you can even get into it. So I include access. Wheelchair accessibility, I would say about a third of the trails, or places included in the book have a wheelchair accessible trail component. That was really important to me for family-friendly hikes because people have different mobility issues, and I recently was doing a story and I met a man who had spina bifida. He's my age. He likes wildlife photography, and he has no idea where he can go sometimes with his wheelchair. And so I just thought it was just really important to include some wheelchair accessible places for people who love to be out there, and also wheelchair accessible places are stroller accessible places, so also great for young families.
The voice you hear is Aislinn Sarnacki, outdoor writer for the Bangor Daily News. At the Eastern Maine Sportsman Show 2 weeks ago, she gave us a sneak preview of her new book coming out soon that describes 35 family-friendly hikes in Maine. And if that was all the book included, it'd still be a good book. But Aislinn has also included essays that deal with topics like hiking as you get older, how to prepare, and advice about how to avoid the most dangerous critter in the woods. That's coming up. This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine on Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket. This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine. Saturday mornings at 9, Sunday mornings at 8 on Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket. I'm at the Eastern Maine Sportsman Show, where 2 weeks ago, Bangor Daily News outdoor writer Aislinn Sarnacki introduced her new book about family-friendly hikes. It'll be released on Down East Books sometime in the next several weeks. Aislinn went to great lengths to make sure the hikes she recommended were family-friendly, even going so far as to test some with kids by borrowing her niece.
And then over here is my niece, Wilhelmina. I don't have kids of my own, so in writing the book, I stole my niece for a few hikes and wanted to see the trails through the eyes of a little girl, and it was some of my favorite commentary ever in a hike. This right here, she's at the Orono Bog Boardwalk. She had never seen anything like a bog, and a lot of people haven't seen anything like a peat bog until they really go out on one of these boardwalks. And I was showing her the different plants because, again, there are interpretive displays out in the Orono Bog Boardwalk, so I didn't need to be necessarily the authority, but I could look at the display and then say, hey, look, this is a plant, this is what this is called. And near the end of the hike, I asked her, what was your favorite plant that you liked throughout the whole bog? Because in the bog, there's carnivorous pitcher plants. She really liked cotton sedge because it has little cotton ball tips. There were some flowers in bloom during that time of year. And she got very dramatic and stood in the middle of the boardwalk, and she said, all of it. It's amazing. And people were walking by us like, what is she doing? And she goes, this is brilliant. And it's funny because a man about his age built this boardwalk. So it goes full circle, and hopefully she grows up really caring about the boardwalk into the future. So I talk about that a little bit in my essay, Hiking Through Life, and how it's a lifelong passion, and you can start it when you're young. And for me, I wasn't necessarily hiking when I was young, but I was wandering the woods in my house. I grew up in Winterport, Maine, in the woods, and I also have the introduction talks about that and my experiences in the woods and how that really made me feel more comfortable hiking later in life. I'm very comfortable just going out by myself. I actually really enjoy just being out there in the quiet. I like having hiking buddies, and especially when they help me with camera work. But I also sometimes just want to get out by myself, and I feel very comfortable doing that, and I attribute that to my experiences when I was young and my parents kicking me outdoors. So, scariest creature in the Maine woods. We've got all sorts of creatures. I've taken all these pictures. I'm very proud of it. I went on a moose tour for the Bangor Daily News, tough gig, and got to see some moose. So we've got a moose picture here. We've got, I see porcupines all the time when I'm hiking. I love them, but I don't love them when I have Oreo. I've had to actually tie his leash to a tree once because he really wanted to get at the porcupine. And then I had the opportunity to go out with another wildlife photographer and take a picture of a mom and her baby bear from afar. But of all these creatures, I've never felt threatened What do you think is probably the most dangerous creature in the Maine woods? And it's not of these animals.
I know this one.
You do? Yeah. Anybody else have a guess? Because Bob he's just creature fanatic.
I'd say something really small. Tick.
Tick. Yep. Absolutely. Is that what you're going to say, Bob, then? Yep. Okay, so there's not like some rare bird that... I hate ticks. And in this, in my book, I do talk about ticks right in the beginning, because if I didn't write a whole essay on ticks, then I'd be mentioning ticks in every single place that I mention in the book. And actually, my mother, who edited the book, picked that up. She's like, you keep mentioning ticks. You should just take it out and write a whole thing on it.
It's a downer.
It's a downer, and it scares people away from trails. So I talk about how ticks are all over Maine now. You're not going to escape them necessarily. There are places they are much more numerous right now, but they are all over the place. So I try to give you ideas about how to be safe. People ask me, how often do you get ticks on you? And I don't get ticks on me that often. It has happened more often in mid-coast Maine, along the coast, and it happens a lot more when I'm doing trail networks that are in fields, where you're going through a field. But for the most part, when I stay on trail and I'm not rubbing up against underbrush and I don't sit on the ground, I don't get ticks on me. So, but I do give different advice on ticks, and I also try to give the latest research in my essay about where ticks are now and what diseases they carry. It keeps changing. So now ticks are found in every single county in Maine, and Lyme disease has been found in every single county in Maine, which comes from the deer tick or black-legged tick. Hopefully, I tried to write about it slightly upbeat, but I tried to be real. So there is a whole essay on ticks, and it was tough to fit everything in. I mean, I've written about ticks so many times over the years for the Bangor Daily News that I have sat down with the University of Maine Cooperative Extension people talking about ticks so much that I think I'm quite knowledgeable about them by now, which is kind of cool. Getting ready for an easy hike, I talk about that in one essay, and I just basically give what works for me. But I will say here that a backpack is the number one thing for me, especially with family-friendly hikes. Thinking of all the things that you have to do with your hands. I've seen people out there with tote bags or things that sling across, or with no bag at all, which makes me feel uneasy. Even when it's a very easy trail, I like to have water with me. I like to have snacks with me. I like to have the trail map with me. There's been a figure-8 trail once out in Acadia, the one I talk about here, Ship Harbor Nature Trail. I didn't have the trail map with me, and I got turned around and did the same loop twice. And that's someone who is out on trails a lot. So I like to always just have stuff with me. I don't go overkill. So I talk about some of the items that I bring with me and how, when I didn't have those items, how it was a problem. I remember I'd never used to bring a first aid kit when I first started hiking. And a first aid kit does seem overkill for a lot of people, especially if you're going out on an easy trail. I remember I was up on Old Speck Mountain, and I was just looking at the view, and I took a step, tripped over a root, scun up both my knees, both my hands, and I was bleeding everywhere, and I was fine, but I looked ridiculous. And I was going down the mountain at that time, so I didn't have much of a ways to go. So I tried to rub off, in a stream and with leaves. I had leaves stuck to me, and I'm going down the trail, and a whole troop of Boy Scouts goes by me, and I look ridiculous, and I was so embarrassed. And they're like, "Do you need some first aid?" I'm like, "No, I'm fine. I'm just gonna get back to my car right now. I'm fine."
Aislinn Sarnacki, outdoor writer for the Bangor Daily News, talking about her new book coming out on family-friendly hikes. Coming up, we'll crash the party at another presentation about the intertidal zone along the Maine coast. Wait a minute. If you're thinking that sounds boring, ask yourself this question. Why do so many critters in that part of the ocean have no heads? Stand by. This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine on Sports Radio 92.9, The Ticket. This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine on Sports Radio 92.9, The Ticket.
I love the intertidal. I just find it a really fascinating place.
Chris Peterson is a marine biologist at College of the Atlantic in Bar Harbor. 1 week ago, Dr. Peterson did a presentation at Fields Pond Audubon Center in Holden. It lasted about 90 minutes, so we'll just enjoy a few points that may make you rethink how you look at the ocean. The intertidal zone is where you find things like clams and mussels and barnacles and a bunch of critters that you don't even know exist. But more than that, a lot happens in that zone that changes by 20 feet every tide. Mud holds water, rocks dry fast. A lot of critters have to bury themselves in mud or attach themselves to rocks just to survive. It gets crowded, and it's more crowded lower in the zone. Why is that?
Of all these organisms, if we ask how many of them come from the ocean and how many of them come from the land, it's the intertidal after all. A good guess would be 50-50. Maybe it should be equal to both. But what is it really? What is virtually everything from here coming from?
Water.
It's coming from the ocean. And so there's hardly anything that's migrated down terrestrially. And so that means that everything is getting stressed as it moves up. And that's kind of odd that it's not more of a mix. But we don't really think about that very often. And so what happens is because when you go from that intertidal to a tide pool, what you get is you start seeing all of this extra life and all of this species diversity. You get sponges and algae and, limpets and little barnacles and other kinds of algae and nudibranchs and coral and algae. You just get all this fun stuff.
So let's rethink things. The environment we're used to is air. The environment of ocean critters is water. Obvious.
There's a major difference between air and water that just is dramatic in how it affects marine environments. And that is that water is really buoyant compared to air. And so when you put things up in water, they stay up in water. When you put things up in air, they fall down. And so what's the biggest organism that's ever lived? Blue whale. You can't make an elephant that big because as it scales up, the weight makes its legs have to get bigger than the body of the elephant. And so it would have incredible kind of leg rub. It would be huge. But that buoyancy allows really big things to get there. It also allows really tiny things in there. And so in the marine environment with that water, suddenly you have living organisms that can exist in the medium. It would be like if the air were cloudy one day because there was a plankton bloom in the air. And what that means is it means that they can photosynthesize in the water. It also means that there's food in the water. And there isn't that much food in the air. And so there's this whole kind of lifestyle that exists in water that doesn't exist on land. That's, we call it filter feeding, because you're just trying to filter out that medium that you're in.
So humans are accustomed to a two-dimensional world. We've got length and width, but the only way we experience height is to wait in a terminal and hope our plane isn't delayed. Same with food. It's all down here on one level with us. The highest we have to stretch to reach food is maybe the top of an apple tree. And we dig potatoes, and that's about it. But in the ocean, all the critters move in 3 dimensions, and food moves in 3 dimensions. For a lot of critters in the intertidal zone, they just attach themselves to something and wait for the food to come to them.
None of these organisms, except for the whale, have a head. All of them are attached to the bottom. They're not moving around. They're sessile, which we tend to think of as a plant trait, not an animal trait. As we go through that and we look, we realize that one of the things that happens in animals in marine environments is a lot of times they lose their individuality and they become colonial. And so just in the same way we can think of plants as being modular with leaves and stems that are repeated structures, animals do the same thing in marine environments. And a lot of groups of animals never make it into fresh water and never make it into terrestrial environments because they're colonial animals.
That's what this part of today's show is really all about. When you're looking at nature, what are you really seeing? So you've got a huge ocean, and the intertidal zone is just a tiny sliver of that wet habitat. A lot of critters need to pack into that zone. If they were able to move, they'd be bumping into each other and fighting over food and sunlight and other resources. But these guys can't move. So a lot of animals in this zone bunch up and become colonial, just waving their filters in the water, hoping something edible will drift into them. But now it's time to reproduce. They're stuck to a rock and can't move. How does a barnacle have sex?
There's 2 problems that this barnacle has. One, it's an animal, and it's a sexual animal, and so it reproduces. The other thing is it's stuck right where it is. And so reproducing is difficult. And it's difficult for a lot of reasons. These are outcrossing individuals, so they have to actually mate with somebody nearby. So it's nice that there's somebody right next door to them. Barnacles are actually, when you open them up inside, they look like little shrimp. And so they're actually crustaceans. They're related to lobsters and crabs. And all lobsters and crabs and shrimp have internal fertilization. So they actually have a penis that actually has to leave their little shell and go and find somebody that's nearby. Luckily, they're simultaneous hermaphrodites, so they don't have to go far to find somebody that's mateable. But still, they have to do that. But then, instead of raising their kids and keeping them in, and that when the babies are really small, they can release them and send them out into the water, because in the water they can feed. And so they don't have to keep them at home and raise them. And so having that marine environment and that oceanic environment where you can actually send your kids off, even as very small propagules, turns out to be a really useful thing. So the most common life cycle in most marine organisms is to have a larval stage that's out in the middle of the ocean. Or not in the middle of the ocean, but out in the water column. And the way they do that is a lot of times, this is a sponge, it's actually releasing eggs, and then another sponge will release sperm nearby, and then they'll just fertilize in the water column. This is a sea urchin on its top surface. This one's releasing sperm.
So that happens. You're stuck in place, but your naughty parts go visit your neighbor next door. Or you release your eggs into the same water I'm releasing my sperm, and because everything is buoyant, it all mixes together and fertilizes. You see some of that on land with pine pollen or fern spores, but it happens much more out there in the ocean. And then there's crabs. Dr. Peterson is showing us a photo of a patient male crab.
So this crabs, remember, have internal fertilization. So this is a male holding onto a female. He's actually waiting for her to molt, to lose her exoskeleton, because if you think of an exoskeleton as armor, they have to wait until the female molts to be able to copulate with her. And so they actually wait until that happens.
It's nice that he's waiting for her to come out of her shell, huh? Meanwhile, here's something else that makes the intertidal zone like something from another planet. You got a bunch of headless critters attached to a rock. There's some critter fornication going on. And you might think that many of those individuals all clustered together are related because of that. Well, think again. Because the ocean habitat is a three-dimensional environment with babies that are released to drift anywhere the current takes them.
So the guys on this shoreline, if this is in Bar Harbor, might have come from Lubec or Nova Scotia or, I don't know, Jonesport. They could have come from anywhere, probably up current. I was picking up current places. But it means that, so think about other things. Think about if there was something like an oil spill. So think about there was an oil spill that destroyed several miles of coastline. How long would it take it for the organisms to recover? For a set of them, the next year there would be larvae coming in from distance and resettling that place. It would be like having a tree with really good dispersal, or some kind of bird seed dispersed fruit or something. You could get plants back really quickly. And so for some species, they're really broad. And because of that, wild dispersal, it turns out that there aren't very many marine populations that are very local.
Yeah, but here's the funny thing. You've got a barnacle, and he's attached to the rock, and he dies. He stays right there. Even a dead barnacle in the intertidal zone is fascinating.
So this is a dead barnacle, but it's still attached. It turns out, I remembered from my long ago undergraduate days being told that barnacle attachment, the glue, was really important, and they were thinking about it in dentistry. And I thought, I'll Google search that and see if that still exists. It turns out that they're thinking about it in 2016 and 2017. And so because this is a glue that sets underwater. So it's like marine epoxy. And so in something like dentistry, this is a great idea, right? And so they're really interested. And there's actually people currently doing research trying to understand some of the characteristics of the glue that these guys lay down their shells with, which is pretty amazing to me.
Okay, one more thing to investigate when you're next looking at the shoreline below high tide. These guys can get so crowded that there's no more room to compete sideways. So they start competing up.
Competition becomes really different because one of the things they're competing for, and you can actually see these barnacles are kind of doing it in times, is they're competing for space on that rock. But they're not just competing with other barnacles, they're competing with everything else that wants space. And some of the things that want space may be plants. And so the marine environment's weird in that things that you wouldn't think of as competitors, you would think of plants and animals as like one's food and one's eater and one's eaten. But actually, an algae and a barnacle could be competitors in the same environment. And in some cases, their barnacles are actually growing on the mussels, which turns out to happen a lot in the intertidal because space is so tight. Everybody just starts growing on top of each other. And the other thing that happens is, so here's a little picture of some barnacles looking at them from the side. And once they get growing straight up, and they hit each other, then they grow up. And so they end up coming these little columnar forms. And this becomes really problematic because the barnacle alive, this is a very unstable structure in the intertidal to be up like this high. And so they tend to get washed off. And so this competition with everybody trying to get taller than everybody else turns out to be a real problem. And you can see that a whole area got wiped out there, and now there's new little barnacles coming in trying to grow.
Some days it doesn't pay to get out of bed. You run out of room to grow sideways, and the more you try to compete upwards, the more likely a storm is going to come along and rip you off the rock. You know, some days I think I know how that barnacle feels. Dr. Chris Peterson is a marine biologist at the College of the Atlantic at Bar Harbor. This presentation took place a week ago at Fields Pond Audubon Center in Holden. In a moment, we'll meet two of the fiercest predators out there in the rockweed. Stand by. This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine on Sports Radio 92.9, The Ticket. Welcome back to Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine on Sports Radio 92.9, The Ticket. Chris Peterson is a marine biologist at the College of the Atlantic in Bar Harbor. A week ago, he spoke to an enthusiastic group at the Fields Pond Audubon Center in Holden, explaining just what makes Maine's intertidal area a really weird place. I'm sharing a few of the snippets, and the one thing that got everyone's attention was starfish, or sea stars, depending on your preference. We've already mentioned that there are a lot of critters in tidal waters that don't have heads. But starfish do have 5 legs, or arms, or whatever they are, and it's pretty spooky how they use them.
These guys turn out to be probably the nastiest predators out there. He's going to use his tube feet to pull the mussel apart, although I bet they narked out the mussel a little bit to make this easier. And so now it's pulling the mussel apart. And then what sea stars do is they take their stomach and they evert it inside to the mussel. And so they take the half of their stomach, and you're going to see this kind of clearish material. That's actually the stomach of the sea star coming into the mussel, and then it's going to start releasing digestive enzymes. And so what it's actually going to do is it's not going to digest the mussel inside of the sea star. It's actually going to digest the mussel inside the mussel, then suck up all the juices, and then pull itself back in. And so this would take a couple hours. I think it takes 20 seconds in this particular one. But sea stars turn out to be very, very good. They're very patient. They'll land on something. They'll pull it apart just far enough to get their stomach in. And then they'll get their stomach in and release it all. And then at the end, when they just pull away, which this one will do in a couple seconds, there's basically not really any muscle left. And then it goes on to the next thing. So you can actually pull over. You can pull up sea stars sometimes when they're in the middle of feeding. You can actually see their little gelatinous stomachs out. A lot of times when they're raised up a little bit, they're doing that.
I tried to watch the video, but I didn't have the stomach for it. Sea stars are native, and there aren't so many that they're eating up all the mussels. Unfortunately, there is a non-native critter that is. You can probably guess where I'm going with this.
Green crabs are invasives that are in the news a lot these days. They've been here for at least 80 years, probably closer to 90 years. There was a big outbreak of them in the 50s, and then 2 or 3 years ago there was another big outbreak of them. And the 50s and 2 or 3 years ago both had something very much in common, and that was that sea surface temperatures got much hotter in those years. And so in the mid-50s we had a couple really warm years, and these green crabs took off. And then about 3 years ago, we had the, not the 2 year ago, the really horrible winter we had. Well, I don't know about horrible. The really cold, intense winter. But the year before that, it was really mild. And the sea surface temperatures never got very cold. And people think that this is a more southerly species and doesn't do as well here when it gets cold. So what does that mean about the future of green crabs in the Gulf of Maine? They're going to increase, right? Because we're a crowd that actually is pretty sure that global climate change is real, and so they're on the increase. And so why is that a concern? It's a concern because this is a really common habitat that they're in. And who's making all these holes? Those are all soft-shell clam holes. And you can see these are all dead clams, and they're all about a half-inch long, maybe. It's hard to tell because there's kind of a smoking gun here, but we don't really have a direct relationship. We know that we think there's a lot of clam mortality. We know that green crabs are more abundant. Over this last year, which was a warm year, this last summer, right, we had, on some of the clam flats that I work with clammers, they had 90% mortality rates on the clam flats.
You know, we talk a lot about invasive species in Maine. It does seem to be an epidemic sometimes. The reason may be a little speculative, but also kind of logical.
The diversity on the Gulf of Maine coast species-wise is not very high, especially in the rocky habitat. It's not, I mean, there's a lot of species, but it's small compared to other places. And the most common explanation for that is the last ice age came down and covered to Cape Cod. And so what happened if you were a rocky organism? Where could you go if you were rocky intertidal? What's south of Cape Cod? Sand. And so you were stuck. And so it was like the same thing happened in Europe. In the Alps are east-west. And so when the Ice Age came, things came up and got trapped up against the Alps. Whereas in the Rockies, things were able to move up and down. And so things were able to handle ice ages much more when you can move latitudinally. And things got stuck latitudinally a little bit in the Gulf of Maine because there wasn't rocky habitat. Now there is, but it's jetties in North Carolina and stuff like that. So some people think that one of the reasons we're really primed for species introductions is because we don't have a lot of species, and it's easy for an invasive to come in and make it here.
As for invaders from Europe, if it happened recently, it probably came across in the bottom of a boat or in bilge water or ballast water. Therefore, if you're on the lookout for invasives, where would you look first?
So one of the places we go when we're looking for invasive species is we go into harbors and we look along pilings and stuff and see if there are invasives there. And that's one of the first places they tend to show up. And so that was really common in the 1800s. And then when things changed over and they started having metal-hulled boats, and we started doing a better job of keeping them clean, a lot of the transformation of introduced species came because the way we used ballast then is instead of putting rocks in the hulls, we filled them up with water. So we had water-filled containers. And so we'd go into an estuary in Germany, fill it up with water, and then take that to Michigan through and then we would dump that water out. And look, we have zebra mussels from Europe. And so now there's a rule that halfway across the ocean, unless the waves are really rocking, you have to dump your ballast water and retake in new ballast water. And so they're really, right, because it's only working because it's freshwater to freshwater or brackish to brackish. If you do it in the middle of the ocean, it's going to die. And so you still have to worry about safety, but so those are some of the international treaties that people are working on, trying to reduce that exchange of these introduced species. But a lot of them, with climate change, we're going to keep on getting a lot of these guys coming up. Green crabs are not going away, right? We know that they're going to get worse.
The next question is obvious. They're crabs. Why don't we just eat them? Unfortunately, they're small, they don't have a lot of meat, and even if we just wanted to grind them into cat food or compost, it wouldn't be worth the labor.
These guys, the fishermen are trying so hard, and people have come in with various techniques, and some, I don't know what to call them, hucksters, but there's people that have been trying to figure out a way to, they're not very big crabs, you don't get a whole lot of meat out of them. People have thought about massive composting. I know somebody that had green crabs kind of crawling across their field at one point. And so it's but the numbers are just phenomenal. And so if I put out a big trap, and I leave it in for 24 hours and I come back, I can have 100 crabs in it. And then I can take that and I can come back and I can do it again. And I can do it again. And in fact, I was at a Wednesday night, I was at a clam meeting, and the clammers are just going to do it and they're trying to figure out how do we compost them. They don't even want to make money off them. And they said, we want to kill green crabs. And so we got a grant that was basically to buy crab traps. and gave them crab traps. And so now we're giving them crab traps and kind of going, go off and get them.
It looks like we're stuck with green crabs forever, which means we will likely see fewer clams and mussels, and we'll see fewer native species that eat them like eider ducks. Plus, there are other threats like climate change and ocean acidification and microplastic litter bits. So it may be that we just have to get used to a new normal, which is not the way we should be leaving this planet to future generations. Well, my thanks to Dr. Chris Peterson for all the disappointing news. If you want to be disappointed again, this show and all previous shows are archived on the web at 929theticket.com. Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine is brought to you by Hammond Lumber, Napa Auto Parts, Doors Equipment, and EBS. We'll return next Saturday morning at 9 and Sunday morning at 8. This is Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket.